Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session today. We are elated to have you. We hope that you are enjoying the conference thus far, and we are excited to spend the next 30 minutes with you talking about AI and some really cool anecdotal evidence that we have from the Canadian landscape and beyond. First and foremost, who are we and why should you listen to us? I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Adam Rodricks, and I am the National Lead of Digital Marketing at KPMG in Canada. I'm a professor at George Brown College in Toronto, and I'm one of the National Post Top 100 speakers in the country. I will now pass over to Carolina to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. And I have to say that I'm very, very excited being here. It's kind of nice to be at conferences again. That feeling is great. So I'm Carolina Bessega. I'm the Chief Product Officer and co-founder at Stradigi. I have a very scientific background, and my main expertise is in applied machine learning. I have been in the field for more than 20 years now. And my company, Stradigi, our passion, this is why we're in the business track, our passion is how to bring AI to businesses, how to actually do something meaningful out of all this science and these techniques. So I'm very excited being here with Adam, and we're going to have a great time.
Awesome, cool. And we encourage you, if you have questions for either of us based on anything that we say or our backgrounds in AI and social media and product marketing, we encourage you to put it into the chat. We'll certainly try to leave time at the end of our half hour together so that we can address some of these questions. Cool. Carolina, do you want to get started with your questions?
Yes, I'm going to start. I'm very curious about social listening. You know, that is arguably the task that probably handles more data in your day-to-day. So how this data can actually affect your campaigns, because it is a lot of data.
It's a lot of data.
Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. You know, I think when we think about the social listening activities and how they inform either, audience demographics or marketing campaign effectiveness, we often think about sentiment scoring, but I know you're going to talk about sentiment scoring because it's definitely your bread and butter. So I'm going to leave that and I'm going to instead focus on volume of conversation. Volume of conversation is really interesting, whether it's indexed under a keyword or a hashtag, because it gives us an indication of the appetite for said content, right? You look at something and there's an abundance of content. Okay, now you know it's being heavily discussed. You may choose strategically to throw more fodder on that fire and reap the benefits, but I want to present an alternate way of looking at the data, and that is the absence of conversation. It's almost as important as the abundance of conversation. How can this be possible? As an example, we look at times of crises, namely Hurricane Sandy. When it touched down on the eastern seaboard, as an example, the American Red Cross went digital to prevent further disaster. And what they did was essentially use social listening software and an unbelievable amount of data as a vital tool for actionable intelligence for their day-to-day in terms of response. So during that entire week, they tracked upwards of 2 million posts, something that we just, if you're looking at that much data on social media, often it can be really hard to make sense of it unless you're using, enterprise level software. But what they found was not so much what was being said, but not said. When they had massive areas just go completely dark, I mean, you can think about it in the context of your own home, right? It's pretty much a win if you're able to get a teenager to stop using their phone at the dinner table. But when an entire grid of, say, a 3-mile radius goes dark at once, it's indication of something larger. It means something's gone wrong. It probably means that that area needs help. So clusters of people recognized that these efforts of Red Cross were coming to where there were power outages. And so they began using their data connections and live tweeting everything from, we need bottled water to, I'm not doing so well mentally right now. And the Red Cross responded with support. So in the end, talk about a really effective way to interpret data that really it led to bolstering their response efforts as a result of social listening, as a result of the lack of conversation. So really, really cool.
Well, that is really impressive. I'm trying to think, first of all, in how actually you were able to monitor all that, after how you cluster it, how you understand when somebody's not talking about something is really impressive, and reminds me of a project I worked like 3 years ago. It was in the stock market, it wasn't something completely different. And basically the idea was, okay, how sentiment at the beginning was how sentiment can predict or not the price of a stock. And what we discovered was that the sentiment wasn't the important factor, was actually the volume of social interactions, what was important. So much more important of, okay, is people talking positively or negatively about something? Is people talking about it or not talking about it? So very interesting pattern we're seeing here. And talking about interesting patterns, and during the last year and a half, the marketplace has changed. Everything has evolved in a different way due to the pandemic. So has you seen any trend, any change in that sense in the
Oh my
social
goodness.
media? Yeah.
Absolutely. When we think about how it's transformed in the last year and a half, by virtue of just, the pandemic, there was this influx of new voices online. From a brand perspective, it was really interesting because we did see this influx at the C-suite level, which had never really happened before in droves to this magnitude. But what was so interesting was that in many cases where the CEOs or CMOs or CFOs were managing those social accounts themselves and prioritizing authenticity, we saw them over time actually increase in terms of engagement and number of impressions and followers versus the branded accounts that they were the figureheads of, if you will. So that's really, really interesting. I always say that the best part of social media is that it gave everyone a microphone. And coincidentally, the worst part of social media is that it gave everyone a microphone, right? And this is a great example of what happened during the pandemic. But what we saw in terms of how this played out is really just like an abundance of voices, an abundance of noise. And it gave way to really just you prioritizing trust because you didn't know who else was out there. And how do we do that? One of the coolest ways is micro influencing. So these people who are highly influential, but amongst their immediate circles, right? They don't have these millions and millions of followers. And the coolest thing about micro influencing is you don't need to take me, one marketing guy's word for it. It's literally at play in your day-to-day life. And I mean that both online and offline. You think about yourself, right? You think about, Carolina, the last time that you bought a car, or maybe, you bought a big TV. Odds are, unless you're a tech aficionado or a gearhead, you didn't make these types of decisions in isolation. You probably consulted one or a few people that you trusted within your immediate network, and that is micro influencing at its best. So there's a lot of people who have come online that are really embracing the fact that you don't need to have thousands of followers to be successful, even from a business perspective. And that is exciting me because I think it'll lead to a higher quality of social media. Okay, you've asked me a few questions. Can I ask you one now for a change?
For sure.
Okay. I'm all about storytelling, so I was hoping that you may be able to give me some real world examples in terms of how social media and AI are presently being used in the marketplace.
Yes. So I'm going to start by something related with these micro influencers that you're mentioning. So imagine you have a brand and you actually want somebody to represent your brand. So usually what happens is that you try to find influencers to wear your brand, and after that, these people will promote it, and So now, imagine now you use AI, and in fact, there is companies doing that to detect who is using your brand. So instead of be finding the influencer to ask to use your brand, you go through images or videos and you find, okay, who is using my articles? So now you capture that person, and that person can be a micro influencer, because this was easier maybe before when we're talking about big influencers, because maybe there's 1,000 of them, but micro influencers, there might be millions of them. So how do you know which one is the one that will actually represent your brand in the right way? And it will look natural and organic for that person. So use image recognition with AI. You can do that. You can actually who is using your articles. That is something that people is using right now. The other thing that is very well known, but is in fact affecting everybody, is what we call the personalization at the scale. So when you have your social media feed, or you want an advertisement that comes to you, all these things come personalized. And that personalization happens through recommendations that the AI is doing for the particular individual. And you can be as actually as narrow as you want. You can go at the person level, or you can actually use also smart segmentation. And this is very interesting, because in the past, life is evolving, and human being is evolving. And in the past, maybe when you were segmenting people, maybe you say, okay, this article is for females who live in this location and is between 25 and 30 years old. But now everybody knows that things are not black and white anymore, that it's not necessary that the same things that I like, another female like me also like the same, that actually there is much more diversity and much more richness in the user taste. So instead of being segmenting users by their demographic properties, why you don't segment users by their purchases, their behaviors? Having a behavioral segmentation is much more useful for brands than having a demographic segmentation when it comes to the marketing and advertising.
Completely agree with that, and I see that playing out in my own marketing efforts as well.
Yeah, definitely. So now, social media. So social media is great. Everybody uses it, but what about AI and the overall user experience of the social media? Do you think AI can help social media to get more adoption?
That's an interesting one, and it's I hate to say it, but it is a yes and no type of answer. Just because I've worked with brands that have said chatbots, as an example, they help with immediacy in response. Right? Great, everybody wants their response rate to just be impeccable, but a lot of data shows us that users are bypassing them the second that they realize it's a chatbot to get to the real person, because a human is not going to be able to instantaneously tell you where to get a quote. From our perspective, it's pretty easy to tell, right? We were just talking about this. When you're talking to an AI versus a person, and if you're using a trigger word like "can I get a quote," and they respond instantly with the link to get a quote, the jig's up. You kind of understand. I think what's most important when we look at this is that it's affecting the way that we trust, right? It's not that we don't trust anymore, it's that the way that we trust has changed. And when we look at a unifying trait amongst two really prevalent cohorts, millennials and Generation Z, there's one particular trait that unites the two generations, and it's a detachment from institutions. I find this so fascinating, because essentially what we're saying with that is that, okay, it's not that we are just in the absence of trust. It's that they don't want to go to the big faceless entity at the companies anymore for their answers. They think they'll just get marketed to, but they trust, John behind the scenes, especially if he's online, and what his experience is that makes him, a subject matter expert. So really, really interesting to note that it's not that trust is dwindling, it's that it's shifting. So that's probably the coolest thing to me.
Yes, that's and in fact, chatbots in particular, I think that they are great. They're great for do transactions or operations. In fact, I prefer to do operations with a chatbot when we need to buy something that is quick,
Yes.
is easy, are clear instructions. But actually, when you need some advice or you need something a little bit more complicated, actually the human interaction, it is important. And but one thing that we need to recognize is that is impressive. Is really, if you think about it, it is impressive that the machine is able to identify the intent of a user in each one of the phrases he writes. So because every human writes in a different way, even in the way you speak. So every time you talk with one of these voice assistants, so the amount of science behind that is something that we need to recognize. Maybe it's not still there. Maybe it's not for all the users, but I think we need to give credit to science for these advancements.
Absolutely.
Okay, so when I think about data, that's another question that I have, because now the amount of social media platforms is growing and growing. I don't know how many social media platforms. Before was, okay, this is either Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah.
And now we have Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and you name it. So how the data is different from one to another? Is there any that is more difficult to get insights than another?
Definitely. This is such a great question, because the way that we use each of them certainly different. And I think any, front-end user can appreciate that. But the data that we get, or the lack thereof, on some of the newer emergent platforms is what's of critical importance from a marketing perspective, given the idea and the emergence of dark social. For anybody who's maybe uninitiated with the term, dark social refers to all of those things that we do online, but we don't have perfect analytics behind. As an example, a Snapchat conversation or an expiring Instagram story. Do we get some metrics on it? Absolutely. Can I change your propensity to buy through those types of engagements? 1000%. But can I essentially attribute this to the marketing funnel the way that I could a page post on Instagram or Facebook or a Twitter? Not quite. So this is where, if I can't measure it, is it worth doing? I feel like that answer has completely flipped on its head. And I'm excited to see where dark social goes, how it continues to evolve, but most importantly, how we as marketers can harness the power of dark social to have more meaningful engagements, because conversation, that's really the point of social media. If we're not having the conversation online, we're just doing it wrong. That's my perspective.
Yeah, actually, it's the first time I hear about dark social, to be honest. And I'm thinking with my AI hat and thinking, okay, I actually rely on data and rely on the data that I can get in order to be able to do predictions. Or so how I'm going to do it if now it seems that I cannot get that data through this dark social. So this is going to be a challenge, let's say.
I definitely think so. And speaking of challenges, I want to talk to you a little bit about multi-channel attribution models, just because I think it's always been a bit of a blind spot, or at least a conundrum for many people who work in the industry. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you think AI can lend insights about it?
Well, I thought before you were talking about the dark social. Now I don't know.
Yeah.
No, but talking serious, so AI, in fact, there are multiple techniques of AI that give some light on that topic. So when you have multi-channel attribution, what happens, and I know that you're an expert on this, but for the audience, what happens is that a marketing company decides to try to target users through different media. So I put a TV announcement, and after that I put something in Facebook, and after in Instagram, and at the end, maybe after 3, 4, 5 interactions, this user converts. So now, and that 3, 4, 5 interactions can be maybe weeks, days. A campaign can be a month. So now, how do you know? First of all, how do you know which one was the most important interaction? But even more, usually it's not the one interaction. What is really important is actually 2, 3, or 4 of these interactions working together in the user brain in order to convince him to convert. So, and I'm going to go a little bit to the slightly technical side here.
Yeah, please do.
So in AI, there's a technique, deep learning. And when we use deep learning, there is one particular architecture that is called recurrent neural networks. Recurrent neural networks, actually, what they do is take a sequence of items and predict what will happen after. So let's imagine, and initially was used and is still used a lot for understand natural language. For example, a sequence of words, and I want to understand what is the next word that will come, for example. But in this case, it's a sequence of actions, and I want to understand if somebody will convert or not. So you can use recurrent neural networks, and you put all the ads that this user was exposed, and you say, okay, predict if will convert or not. And maybe the network is very good at predict that. But now, how do you know? You still have the same problem. You have a model that is able to predict if somebody will convert. So I was reading an article, a scientific article, very interesting, but there is something in machine learning called attention. Mm-hmm. And attention, basically what it does is look at where the machine is paying more attention, let's say. So now you can mix the recurrent neural network with attention mechanism. So now you know, okay, which ones were the actions where actually the machine is paying much more attention. And I'm being very inaccurate in what I'm saying, but it's for a general audience. So and that way you can know, okay, these 3 interactions were the 3 that are more important. So this is where I want to put my next marketing spend. So that, yes, it can help, except in the case of the dark web.
Yes, of course. That's really interesting.
Okay, so we have been actually talking about a lot of very interesting topics, and one of the things I was mentioned was about, can we convert? So is this user going to convert or not? Mm-hmm. But now, imagine I want to actually launch a campaign, but I want this campaign to be viral. So imagine I want to be a rock star. So I want this to be viral. So you, as an expert in digital marketing, how do I do that? Do you have the magic formula for that?
Oh, Carolina, if I had a nickel for every time someone asked me, can I go viral? Frankly, I'd have several nickels. And in the paperless world that we live in, especially post-COVID, I'd have nothing to do with them. But can you plan to go viral? Look, I think that first and foremost, we have to embrace the fact that there are ways to manufacture virality. Like social media is very much a pay to play environment nowadays. Like we need to embrace that first and foremost. You cannot plan to go viral. People, as in plural, make things go viral. A great example of this goes back to like 2015. Any fans of rap music may remember it. There's an artist named Silento. If you don't remember Silento by the name of the artist, you probably remember his smash hits, Watch Me Whip, Watch Me Nay Nay, which was it was a cultural phenomenon. It was basically like the 21st century equivalent of the Macarena. It was huge. Everybody was doing it. And I think it peaked at like something like number 3 on the US top 100 on Billboard. So really everybody knew what it was. And the fascinating thing about Silento's example from a marketing perspective was that even though he was seemingly an overnight success, he said it was planned. He said he always planned to go viral. And everybody looked into this like, okay, how could this have been true? Because the fact of the matter is that when Silento released that single, he did so at the age of 17. He did so from his parents' basement, and he just uploaded it to SoundCloud. So I think a lot of people watching were like, this doesn't seem like a recipe for going viral if I've ever heard one. But really what was happening behind the scenes is that he releases the song, it gets some traction, he then gets signed by Capitol Records. Once that happens, Capitol Records, they hire a company that's called Dance On, and Dance On essentially are experts in creating what look like viral dance trends, but are very much orchestrated behind the scenes. So Dance On was then contracted to hire a network of approximately 50, YouTubers and Instagrammers and Vine, for anybody who remembers Vine influencers to upload their own version of the Whip Nay Nay. And they got, a whopping tune of something like 50 million views off of that. So it's a testament, again, going back to a previous answer, to the power of influencing, not on a micro scale in this instance, but, more established influencers, and just manipulating trust, because we knew that these were the pundits, these were the branded accounts that younger cohorts were going to trust over everybody else. So I think by and large, in terms of virality, it looked real, like it smelled real. It came up on your feed organically. There was no sponsor tag. And that's why we've been trying to, crack down on this in recent years. But it was, in fact, a paid placement. And that's true of a lot of quote unquote virality, a lot of viral branded campaigns. And that's why we all have to proceed with caution and kind of bring that lens of skepticism to what we're seeing and how authentic it really is.
Yes, I'm seeing when I'm listening to you, you repeat over and over about authenticity, trust, and I actually think it is actually very important. When something looks too marketing, too fake, you start not trusting that. You say, oh, this I don't think is real. So I'm thinking while you're talking that it would be very useful to build a machine learning model able to give a degree of trustability to a campaign that you're creating. So you create a campaign, you pass that through your model, and your model tells you, okay, I think that this percentage of users will think that this is real and can be trusted.
Okay, well, let's keep that line of questioning going there, because I think you're onto something here. We talked about the importance of being real. I think it's a paramount concern. We talked about models maybe helping out a little bit because ease of use is also really, really important. So talk to me a little bit about generative models. Like AI create full-on ads or campaigns for us, or are we not quite there yet?
Yes, so this comes perfect with the concept of trust. So generative models like GPT-2, GPT-3. So it's basically what it is I have a piece of text. I start writing a sentence, and now the machine is going to complete the full paragraph. This is the type of generative model. There are other things that we can do, like, for example, use that for paraphrasing. So I already wrote something and it's paraphrased, or even to summarize. Generative models is anything that creates something out of an input. And it can also generate images. So now, how much can we trust and how they look human? So this sometimes looks a little bit scary because every day this is a little bit more realistic and a little bit more difficult to differentiate what has been written by AI versus what has been written by a human. What is true is that if I were going to use generative models for anything in my work, I would never ever publish that directly. First of all, because the machine has no filters yet. So it might be saying things that are not right. Also, still the readability not necessarily is always 100%. So we're not at the point where it's perfect, but we are going close to that. And I know, and this can be really positive applications. I know a company that actually it uses generative models to paraphrase titles. So you have a title of an article, it is paraphrased in multiple ways, and after that they also use AI to segment customers, and now they send a different title that still means the same, but is written in a different. One is more formal, more informal, more juvenile. And in that way, they capture the attention of people. We can after talk a little bit about the ethics of doing these kind of things, but this is something that is now happening more and more. So generative models are here, and I want to give an example that is not in marketing, but anyway, I think is very interesting because generative models can be used to generate. Imagine you want to train a self-driving car. And this is in fact a real example. So they were training a self-driving car in California. California, there's never snow. So they had no ways to actually train the self-driving car in the snow. So what they did was using these models where create the same roads that California, but now they put all the snow. So they generate new videos, but now with the right weather. So now the self-driving car can be trained for that circumstances, because there's no snow in California, but if there is one day, these cars need to be trained to drive in that circumstances. So there is a lot of very positive examples of generative models. We don't need to be afraid. And at the end of the day, it's the human who decides what goes live and what's not.
Yes. And what I'm hearing from you is that there's progress, but it's not perfection yet, but we're certainly on the right track.
Yes.
Okay. Well, staying on that track, I want to talk a little bit about something that we call text sentiment analysis, right? So different companies, it's going to be different use cases, but I'm just wondering, how can most companies go into leveraging text sentiment analysis in their day-to-day operations?
That I think is one of the AI use cases and most companies leverage today. And there are multiple ways. One thing is brand monitoring. So you basically, you are doing your social listening, you have no time to read all these articles or all these posts, you do sentiment analysis and you get some kind of distribution. But also you can do other things. Imagine you have a live show, and now you want to measure sentiment over time while you're doing the show. And you can measure you can try to find emotional triggers. So you can learn from your customer what action from your show is actually making them angry or sad, or what do they find cute. So, and after that, you can launch campaigns or you can do any other thing with that. So I find that it's not only to do customer reviews or to understand how people use your brand, but also understand your audience and being able to create your own campaigns after for that audience based on what actually triggers their emotions or their attention.
That's really interesting, and it's swirling for me some questions around ethics that I want to get to, just because although I believe in the technical capability, I don't know how I feel about some of the stuff that I'm putting out there being used in this way. I think we're going to talk about data privacy, fairness, and ethics. And actually, one of the questions that came in from the audience pertains to that. So maybe I can ask you that first, and then we'll come back to the question. So the audience member asks, as a marketer, what is your view on the direction that Apple specifically is taking with its privacy measures, attribution and tracking, so on and so forth?
So I want to tell you what's my opinion as a human being and as a user. I think that you need to be given the right to decide what to do with your data. And different people has different views and different thresholds of what things are good and are bad. For example, myself, sorry, this is the timer for the talk.
Good.
Myself, I actually feel that it's good to use my data because I'm going to get more personalization and more help in certain things. But if you think that your data should not be used, you need to have the right to actually say no. But and having that right, it comes to something that is basic, that is the terms and conditions. And we
Mm.
actually have a big hole that I know that there are several companies that are trying to fill, that is these terms and conditions, nobody reads them. When I enter to any
Hmm.
site, terms and conditions, scroll, 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 checkbox, go. So I know a company in Montreal, in fact, that they have an application that they take the terms and conditions and they give you like a summary of the 10, using AI, by the way, 10 main things you need to know. But every company should do that. I think that data needs to be used in the way that the human wants to use that data. The
Hmm.
company should not be using the data without your consent. And you need to know why they are using your data. And even more, you need to know what you're receiving that is being influenced by that data. So if I'm receiving news, I would like to know, or have a way to go to a place, say, okay, you are receiving this news because according to your data, A, B, C, D. And I should be able to say, no, I don't want you to filter my news according to what I think. Send
Yeah.
me all the news. I want to see all of them. Don't send me the
Hmm.
one that you think I like. And I think that that will make the life much more ethical, and definitely data privacy must be respected. It's a must for
Absolutely.
every company.
A great answer. And thank you, audience member, for that question. We'll do one last call in case anybody else has questions for Carolina or myself. You can certainly submit them through the chat box right now, and we will do our best. We are coming to the close of the session. So just to keep that going, that conversation around the intersection of AI and social media as it pertains to data privacy and fairness and ethics. Any other key aspects to consider, Carolina? I'm going to just say that your example that you shared in terms of AI taking these really dense terms and conditions, which I myself am so guilty of just scrolling to the bottom and blindly accept. Like they could have asked me for naming rights to my firstborn. I never would know until the day that happens. But I think that's a great way that they can essentially just boil this down into something that is actually readable, because very, very, very few people are taking the time to go through such a dense document and understand it in real time. So that's a great way that I see AI actually propelling us forward while not taking away, human intervention, human trust, still leaving us in a decision maker's seat, which is of paramount importance, I think, to most of us.
Yeah. There's one last aspect that is more for the people who train the model and not necessarily for the people who consume the model, is about be careful with the data that you are using. Be careful that this data is not biased, that you're not only seeing one perspective or one side of the pie. So this is very important, because if you give biased data to an algorithm, even if the algorithm is fair and the algorithm is well done, the algorithm is going to have a biased prediction.
Right.
So that is also, and that is a topic for a full chat to talk about bias and ethics. But that's another thing that every data science and every company needs to pay attention to their training data, and that need to be something in their accountability chart. This is something that, okay, I have a project, I'm going to do this. Did you check for bias in the data? Yes, no. If no, don't proceed. That should be step one for every company.
I think that's great advice. And maybe, as we come to the close of this session, perhaps we can end with some actionable takeaways for people. So Carolina, I was wondering on your social feeds, assuming that you get time with all that you do to actually be on them, how do you stay vigilant? How do you eliminate an algorithm bias? Do you have any sort of tips or processes or procedures that you can enlighten us with?
Oh, wow. I don't think I'm that smart when it comes to my social media. I actually scroll. I don't do anything special more than look at, maybe I choose, as everybody else, I choose who to follow.
Right.
That's something that is important. I try to unfollow when I feel that I cannot trust, or the information is biased. Those things, these micro influencers type of thing, I follow multiple of those.
Yeah.
That's something that I do often, but I actually don't have any. I behave like any other human using social media.
Okay. Well, I was hoping there was going to be some shortcut to staying vigilant on social media, but I guess we're all still having to use our brains and really make that decision for ourselves. Stay critical. From my perspective, when it comes to what you're doing on your social feeds, I really think before you hit the share button on anything. So this is really, platform agnostic advice. Asking yourself two questions: why would I care, and why would I share? And of course, we're trying to always share something that is valid, something that is properly researched, substantiated, or just genuinely interesting. And I genuinely believe that'll make the Twitter sphere and all the other social spheres a much better place. So I don't see any other questions come in. So I think I'm just going to end by just saying, Carolina, thank you so much for your time, for your amazing insights. We know how incredibly busy you are. I'm very, very grateful for you being here with me today to share everything that you talked about.
I think the honor was mine, Adam. I really had a great time. I hope the audience too, because I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank
Awesome.
you, the organizers, and everybody in the audience.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Bye.